The antiseptic smell of Chicago Children's Hospital clung to my scrubs like a second skin as I hurried down the pediatric ICU corridor. My sneakers squeaked against the polished linoleum floors, each step echoing the exhaustion that had settled deep into my bones after another 14-hour shift. The fluorescent lights overhead cast everything in that particular shade of institutional white that made even the healthiest skin look sallow and tired. I paused at the nurse's station, my fingers automatically reaching for the lukewarm coffee that had been sitting there since my break 3 hours ago. The bitter liquid tasted like disappointment and over time, but I needed the caffeine. Room 314 had been calling for pain medication every 20 minutes, and Mrs. Peterson in 318 was still asking when her daughter could go home, even though we'd explained twice that the pneumonia needed at least another day of observation. "Olivia," called Sarah, the charge nurse whose gray hair had earned her the respect of every doctor on the floor. "Dr. Martinez needs you in room 302. New admission." I nodded, downing the rest of my coffee and tossing the paper cup into the overflowing trash bin. The hospital had been understaffed for months, budget cuts forcing us to do more with less while somehow maintaining the same level of care. My feet ached in my worn sneakers, the ones I'd bought on clearance because my student loans didn't leave room for luxuries like proper nursing shoes. Room 302 was at the end of the hall, past the cheerful cartoon murals that some volunteer group had painted to make the place feel less like a medical facility and more like somewhere children might actually want to be. The irony wasn't lost on me that no child wanted to be here. Regardless of how many smiling elephants decorated the walls, I knocked softly before entering, my practiced smile already in place. "Hi, I'm Olivia, your nurse for tonight. How are we feeling?" The boy in the bed looked small against the white sheets, his dark hair stark against the pillow. He couldn't have been more than 6 or 7, with the kind of pale complexion that spoke of too many days spent indoors, too many nights in hospital beds. But it was his eyes that caught me off guard. Dark, intelligent, and holding a weariness that no child should possess. "I don't feel good," he said simply, his voice barely above a whisper. "My chest hurts." I moved closer, noting the slight wheeze in his breathing, the way his small hands gripped the blanket. His chart hung at the foot of the bed, and I flipped through it quickly, absorbing the details. Owen Blackwood, age 6, admitted with acute respiratory distress. History of chronic bronchial infections that had progressively worsened over the past year. The list of specialists who had seen him read like a who's who of pediatric medicine, each one seemingly more baffled than the last. "Well, Owen," I said, settling into the chair beside his bed and speaking in the gentle tone I'd perfected over 5 years of pediatric nursing. "I'm going to take really good care of you, okay? Can you tell me about this chest pain? Does it hurt when you breathe in or all the time?" He considered my question seriously, as if no one had bothered to ask his opinion before. "It's like someone's sitting on me," he said finally. "And sometimes it feels all tight, like my chest is too small for my lungs." I made notes on his chart, but more importantly, I really listened. Too many medical professionals talked over children, around them, but never directly to them. In my experience, kids were often the most accurate historians of their own symptoms if you just took the time to ask the right questions. "That sounds really uncomfortable," I acknowledged, and something in his expression shifted. Recognition, maybe, that someone was finally taking his discomfort seriously. "Have you been coughing much?" "Every night," he said. "It keeps me awake. And sometimes there's stuff that comes up, but I'm not supposed to talk about gross things." I smiled. In here, we talk about all kinds of things that might seem gross to other people. It's part of how we figure out how to make you feel better. "What color is the stuff when you cough?" As Owen described his symptoms with the matter-of-fact honesty that only children possessed, I found myself genuinely puzzled by his case. The constellation of symptoms didn't fit neatly into any of the standard diagnoses his previous doctors had considered. It was like looking at a puzzle where someone had forced pieces from different boxes together, creating a picture that almost made sense, but felt fundamentally wrong. "Owen," I said, after completing my initial assessment, "I'm going to talk to your doctor about some things that might help you feel better. Is your dad coming to visit tonight?" A shadow crossed his young face. "He's working. He's always working. But Marcus is here." He pointed toward the door, where I noticed for the first time a large man in an expensive suit sitting in the visitor's chair just outside the room. The man's posture was alert, professional, his eyes constantly scanning the corridor as if watching for threats that might materialize from behind a medication cart or through the elevator doors. "Is Marcus your uncle?" I asked, though something about the dynamic felt off. The man didn't have the relaxed posture of family. He held himself like security, like someone whose job was protection rather than comfort. "He works for my dad," Owen said simply, as if 6-year-olds routinely required bodyguards. "He makes sure I'm safe." The pieces of the puzzle shifted in my mind, forming a picture I didn't particularly like. A child who needed constant protection, expensive private specialists, and had a father who was always working in ways that required armed security. I'd seen enough children from Chicago's wealthier families to recognize the signs of old money and legitimate power. But this felt different, darker. I pushed those thoughts aside and focused on what mattered. The small boy in front of me who was struggling to breathe and had been failed by some of the best doctors in the city. "Well, Owen, I want you to know that while you're here, I'm going to make sure you're as comfortable as possible. And I'm going to work really hard to figure out what's making you feel so sick." Over the next 2 hours, I threw myself into researching Owen's case. I pulled every medical journal I could access, cross-referenced his symptoms with rare conditions, and even called Dr. Elizabeth Chen, my former professor from nursing school who now worked in pediatric research. The standard treatments weren't working, and standard diagnoses didn't fit. Sometimes, in cases like these, you had to think outside the established protocols. It was nearly midnight when I found it buried in a case study from a hospital in Germany. A rare inflammatory condition that mimicked asthma and pneumonia, but required a completely different treatment approach. The symptoms matched Owen's case almost perfectly, but the treatment protocol was experimental, risky, and would require approval from 6 different departments. I made my way back to Owen's room, my mind racing with possibilities. He was awake, staring at the ceiling with that 1,000-yard stare that sick children sometimes developed when pain became their constant companion. "Hey, buddy," I said softly. "Can't sleep?" "It hurts more when I lie down," he admitted, "but sitting up makes me dizzy." I helped him adjust his position, propping pillows behind him to find the least uncomfortable angle. "Owen, I think I might know what's making you sick. It's something that other doctors might not have thought of because it's pretty rare. But if I'm right, there's a treatment that could help you feel a lot better." Hope flickered in his dark eyes. "Really? Really? But I need to talk to your doctor first, and then we'd need to call your dad to get permission. It's a newer kind of treatment, which means we have to be extra careful and make sure everyone agrees it's the right choice." "My dad will say yes," Owen said with the absolute certainty of a child who had never doubted his father's devotion. "He wants me to get better more than anything." Something in his tone made me believe that despite whatever complicated circumstances surrounded this family, Owen's father genuinely loved his son. "Okay then, let me go make some phone calls." The next few hours passed in a blur of consultations, phone calls, and paperwork. Martinez was skeptical, but intrigued by the research I'd compiled. The hospital's ethics committee needed to review the experimental treatment protocol, and Owen's father needed to be contacted to give consent. It was 4 a.m. when Marcus finally stood up from his post outside Owen's room and made a quiet phone call. I couldn't hear the conversation, but his body language was deferential, respectful, as he explained the situation to whoever was on the other end of the line. "Mr. Blackwood will be here in 20 minutes, Marcus told me after ending the call. "He wants to speak with you directly before making any decisions." 20 minutes gave me just enough time to review my research one more time, to prepare my explanation in terms that a worried father could understand. I'd dealt with anxious parents countless times before, but something about this situation felt different. The security detail, Owen's casual mention of his father's work, the expensive private room in a hospital where most families struggled to afford basic care. It all pointed to a level of wealth and power that I'd never encountered directly. When Oliver Blackwood walked into his son's hospital room at 4:23 a.m., the very air seemed to change. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of presence that made everyone else in the room suddenly aware of their posture and breathing. His dark hair was perfectly styled despite the early hour, and his charcoal suit looked like it cost more than my monthly salary. But it was his eyes that held my attention, the same dark intelligence I'd seen in Owen, but tempered with a hardness that spoke of decisions made in boardrooms where failure wasn't an option. "You're the nurse who thinks she knows what's wrong with my son," he said, his voice carrying just the faintest trace of an accent I couldn't place. It wasn't a question, and there was no warmth in his tone, but there was something else. Desperation, maybe, carefully controlled but unmistakably present. "I'm Olivia," I said, extending my hand and meeting his gaze directly. "I've been Owen's nurse tonight, and I believe I may have identified a condition that explains his symptoms." He shook my hand briefly, his grip firm and warm. "Explain." For the next 15 minutes, I walked him through my research, showing him the case studies, explaining the experimental treatment protocol, and outlining both the potential benefits and risks. He listened without interruption, asking pointed questions that demonstrated both his intelligence and his genuine understanding of medical terminology. "The success rate?" he asked finally. "In the limited trials, 87% of patients showed significant improvement within 72 hours. But Mr. Blackwood, I need you to understand that this is experimental. There are risks and—" "If you do nothing," he interrupted, "what happens to my son?" I met his gaze steadily. "His condition will continue to deteriorate. The inflammation will likely worsen, making breathing increasingly difficult. Eventually he dies," Oliver finished when I hesitated. "Yes." He turned to look at Owen, who was pretending to sleep, but was clearly listening to every word. The transformation in Oliver's expression was startling, the hard businessman facade cracking to reveal a father's profound love and fear. "Do it," he said simply. "Whatever you need, whatever permissions, whatever equipment. Just do it." The treatment protocol began at dawn, and I stayed past the end of my shift to monitor Owen's response. The experimental medication had to be administered intravenously every 4 hours, with constant monitoring of his respiratory function, heart rate, and oxygen saturation. It was the kind of intensive care that required a dedicated nurse, and I'd volunteered to extend my shifts to provide continuity of care. By the second day, Owen's breathing had noticeably improved. The wheeze that had been his constant companion for months began to fade, and for the first time since his admission, he was able to lie flat without discomfort. Dr. Martinez was cautiously optimistic, and even the skeptical pulmonologist who'd been consulted was forced to admit that something remarkable was happening. Oliver Blackwood hadn't left the hospital since that first night. He'd taken up residence in Owen's room, conducting business from his phone and laptop while maintaining a constant vigil over his son. I'd expected him to be an interference, the kind of demanding parent who questioned every medication and challenged every decision. Instead, he was surprisingly deferential to the medical team while remaining fiercely protective of Owen's comfort and dignity. "Miss Olivia," Owen called as I entered his room on the third morning. His voice was stronger, clearer, and he was sitting up in bed without the struggle that had characterized his previous attempts. "Look, I can breathe." He demonstrated by taking a deep breath, then grinning as if he'd accomplished something miraculous. Which, in a way, he had. The simple act of breathing without pain was something most people took for granted. But for Owen, it represented a return to childhood, to possibility, to a future that had seemed increasingly uncertain. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I said, checking his chart and noting the continued improvement in all his vital signs. "How did you sleep last night?" "All the way through," he said proudly. "No coughing, no waking up. And Dad slept too." He pointed to the reclining chair where Oliver was currently working on his laptop, his suit replaced by casual clothes that somehow made him look younger and more approachable. Oliver looked up at the mention of his name, and I was struck again by the transformation that occurred when he looked at his son. The hard edges softened. The calculating intelligence gave way to simple paternal love. "He's been asking when he can go home," Oliver said. "And when you'll be coming with us?" I blinked in surprise. "Coming with you?" "Dad says you're the best nurse in the whole hospital," Owen chimed in, "and that you saved my life when all the other doctors couldn't help me. He says you should come work for us instead of working here." I looked between father and son, trying to process what was being suggested. "Owen, I work here at the hospital. I have other patients who need me." "But I need you too," Owen said with the straightforward honesty of childhood. "What if I get sick again? What if the other nurses don't know about the special medicine?" There was logic in his concern, but something about the situation made me uncomfortable. I'd grown attached to Owen over the past 3 days. It was impossible not to love a child who faced his illness with such bravery and who lit up every time someone showed him genuine care. But the idea of leaving my job, my life, to work for one family felt overwhelming. "Mr. Blackwood," I said carefully, "I appreciate the offer, but I have commitments here. Other patients, a contract with the hospital." "Contracts can be broken," he said simply. "Other arrangements can be made. What would it take?" The question hung in the air between us, and I realized he wasn't just making polite conversation. This was a negotiation, and Oliver Blackwood was a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. The intensity of his gaze made me suddenly aware of the power dynamics at play. This wasn't just a grateful father making an impulsive offer. This was a calculated decision by someone who had identified something he wanted and was prepared to acquire it. "I don't think you understand," I said, trying to keep my voice professional. "I can't just leave my job to work for one family. That's not how nursing works." "Actually," he said, closing his laptop and giving me his full attention, "that's exactly how private nursing works. Wealthy families hire dedicated medical staff all the time. The compensation is typically 3 to 4 times what you'd make in a hospital setting, with full benefits, housing provided if needed, and the opportunity to provide truly individualized care." He wasn't wrong. I knew that private nursing positions existed, but they'd always felt like something for other people, nurses with more experience, better connections, different priorities than mine. I'd chosen pediatric nursing because I wanted to help as many children as possible, not to become the exclusive caretaker for one privileged family. "I need to think about it," I said finally. "Of course," Oliver replied, but something in his tone suggested that he considered the matter already settled. "Take all the time you need. In the meantime, Dr. Martinez has agreed that Owen can be discharged tomorrow, provided he continues to show improvement. I'd like you to oversee his transition home. Make sure he's stable before we make any permanent arrangements." It was presented as a request, but it felt like a foregone conclusion. And truthfully, I was concerned about Owen's discharge. The experimental treatment had worked remarkably well, but he would need careful monitoring for several more weeks to ensure that the improvement was sustained. The idea of handing him over to nurses who weren't familiar with his case, who hadn't been part of his journey back to health, did worry me. "I could arrange to visit a few times," I said carefully. "Check on his progress. Make sure the treatment protocol is being followed correctly." "That would be perfect," Oliver said, and his smile was warm and genuine. "Owen would love that, wouldn't you, buddy?" Owen nodded enthusiastically, already chattering about showing me his room, his toys, his collection of books about dinosaurs. His excitement was infectious, and I found myself smiling despite my reservations about the entire situation. The next 24 hours passed quickly. Owen's discharge paperwork was completed with an efficiency that spoke to his father's influence, and I spent the afternoon going over his care instructions with Oliver and the private medical team that would be taking over his daily care. They were qualified professionals, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Owen would be safer if I remained involved in his care, at least for the transition period. Oliver's car was unlike anything I'd expected. Instead of the flashy sports car or ostentatious limousine I might have imagined, it was a sleek black SUV with tinted windows and what appeared to be reinforced panels. Marcus sat in the front passenger seat, and I noticed a second vehicle following us as we left the hospital parking garage. "Security," Oliver explained when he caught me glancing at the rearview mirror. "Probably seems excessive, but in my line of work, it's better to be overly cautious when it comes to Owen's safety." I wanted to ask what exactly his line of work entailed, but something about his tone discouraged further questions. Instead, I focused on Owen, who was practically vibrating with excitement at the prospect of going home after nearly a week in the hospital. "Miss Olivia," he said, "wait until you see my room. Dad had it painted while I was sick, with dinosaurs on the walls and everything, and there's a reading corner with shelves for all my books." "That sounds amazing," I said, and meant it. Despite my reservations about his father's business, it was clear that Oliver loved his son deeply and spared no expense in making him happy. The Blackwood residence was located in Lincoln Park, behind gates that opened automatically as our convoy approached. The house itself was a stunning example of modern architecture, all clean lines and floor-to-ceiling windows. But what struck me most was how it managed to feel both imposing and welcoming. This was a home, not just a showcase of wealth. Owen gave me the full tour, his energy fully restored now that he could breathe properly. His room was indeed spectacular, with a dinosaur theme that had been executed with taste and attention to detail. But it was the medical equipment discreetly integrated into the space that reminded me why I was really there. A nebulizer disguised as part of a bookshelf, oxygen monitoring equipment hidden behind decorative panels, everything a sick child might need but presented in a way that wouldn't make him feel like a patient in his own home. "This is incredible," I told Oliver, as Owen showed off his collection of fossil replicas. "You've thought of everything." "I had help," he said. The design team consulted with several pediatric specialists to create a space that could function as a medical facility if needed, but still feel like a normal child's bedroom. It was thoughtful, expensive, and spoke to the resources he was willing to deploy to ensure his son's well-being. "He seems so much happier here," I observed. "He is, and so am I, knowing he's safe and comfortable." Oliver paused, watching as Owen carefully arranged his toy dinosaurs in what appeared to be a complex prehistoric ecosystem. "Olivia, I want to discuss the position we talked about. I know it's a big decision, but I think you can see how much good you could do here." Before I could respond, Owen looked up from his toys. "Dad, can Miss Olivia stay for dinner? Mrs. Henderson is making my favorite pasta." "If Miss Olivia would like to stay," Oliver said, "she's more than welcome." And somehow, without quite understanding how it had happened, I found myself agreeing to stay for dinner, then to return the next day to check on Owen's progress, then to consider a temporary arrangement to oversee his continued recovery. Each small agreement felt reasonable in isolation, but together they created a pattern of increasing involvement that made it harder and harder to maintain my professional distance. 2 weeks later, I was living in the Blackwood mansion. It hadn't been planned that way. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, just a few days to ensure Owen's full recovery from the experimental treatment. But on my third visit, Owen had developed a slight fever that sent his father into a barely controlled panic. I'd stayed overnight to monitor his condition, sleeping in the guest room and checking on him every few hours until the fever broke. After that, Oliver had made his offer more concrete. a private nursing position with a salary that was triple what I'd been making at the hospital, full medical benefits, housing provided, and the opportunity to focus exclusively on Owen's care. When I'd hesitated, he'd sweetened the deal. A year-end bonus equivalent to 6 months' salary, full tuition coverage if I wanted to pursue additional certifications, and a living situation that most people could only dream of. Think of it as a sabbatical, he'd said during one of our evening conversations while Owen slept peacefully upstairs. A chance to practice individualized medicine without the constraints of hospital bureaucracy. You've already proven that you can think outside conventional protocols. Imagine what you could accomplish with unlimited resources. He wasn't wrong. The freedom to order any test, consult with any specialist, try any treatment without worrying about insurance approval or hospital policies was intoxicating for someone who'd spent years fighting the system to provide optimal patient care. And Owen was thriving under my constant attention, his health improving daily as we fine-tuned his medication regimen and monitoring protocols. But it was the lifestyle that truly seduced me. The guest room I'd been given was larger than my entire apartment, with a bathroom that featured a soaking tub and a walk-in shower with multiple shower heads. The closet had been stocked with clothes in my size, tasteful, expensive pieces that Mrs. Henderson, the housekeeper, claimed had been purchased just in case I decided to accept the position. Meals were prepared by a private chef who somehow knew my dietary preferences without me having mentioned them. The house had a gym, a library, a home theater, and grounds that included a swimming pool and tennis court. It was like living in a luxury resort, except everything was tailored to my specific needs and preferences. "You seem happy here," Oliver observed one evening as we sat on the terrace after Owen's bedtime. He'd developed a habit of opening a bottle of wine after dinner, and we'd fallen into a routine of debriefing Owen's day while watching the sunset over Lake Michigan. I was happy, which was part of what worried me. "Owen is doing beautifully," I said, deflecting slightly. "His lung function is better than it's been in years, and he's gained 4 pounds since leaving the hospital." "I wasn't asking about Owen's happiness," Oliver said quietly. "I was asking about yours." The directness of the question caught me off guard. "I'm content," I said finally. "This is a beautiful place, and Owen is a wonderful child to work with." "But," he prompted, clearly hearing the hesitation in my voice. I took a sip of wine, trying to organize my thoughts. "It doesn't feel real," I said finally. "This lifestyle, this level of luxury, it's not my world. Sometimes I feel like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's life." Oliver leaned back in his chair, studying me with that intense gaze that always made me feel slightly off balance. "What is your world, Olivia? That cramped apartment with the broken air conditioning? 14-hour shifts for minimal pay? Watching children suffer because their families can't afford optimal care?" His words stung because they contained too much truth. My previous life had been a constant struggle, both financially and emotionally. The work was rewarding but draining, and I'd often felt like I was fighting a losing battle against a system that prioritized profit over patient care. "At least it was honest work," I said, immediately regretting the defensive tone. "And what you're doing here isn't honest." There was an edge to his voice now. "You're providing medical care to a child who needs it. You're using your skills and expertise to improve his quality of life. How is that less honest than rationing your attention among dozens of patients because the hospital is understaffed?" "Because this feels like something else," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "This feels like you're collecting me, the way some people collect art or rare books. The useful nurse who saved your son, carefully preserved in perfect conditions for your exclusive use." The silence that followed was charged with tension. Oliver set down his wine glass and leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his expression serious. "You're not wrong," he said finally. "I am accustomed to acquiring things I value. But you're not a possession, Olivia. You're here because you choose to be, and you can leave anytime you want." Can I? The question slipped out before I could stop it. His eyes narrowed slightly. What does that mean? I gestured around us, encompassing the terrace, the mansion, the lifestyle that had become my temporary reality. This is seductive, Oliver. The comfort, the luxury, the feeling of being valued and appreciated. But it also creates dependence. The longer I stay, the harder it becomes to imagine going back to my old life. Then don't go back, he said simply. Stay. Not as an employee, but as family. The word hung between us, heavy with implication. Oliver. Owen adores you, he continued, his voice taking on an intensity that made my pulse quicken. You've given him something no amount of money could buy, the chance to be a normal, healthy child. You've given me peace of mind, knowing that the most important person in my world is receiving the best possible care. And what would you give me? I asked quietly. Everything, he said without hesitation. Security, comfort, purpose, a chance to practice medicine the way it should be practiced, without constraints or compromises. A family who values you, who sees your worth. It was tempting, more tempting than I wanted to admit. But something about the conversation felt like a trap, beautiful and golden, but still a trap nonetheless. I need to think, I said, standing up from my chair. This is all happening very fast. Of course, he said, rising as well. Take all the time you need. But Olivia, he stepped closer, close enough that I could smell his cologne, see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. Don't overthink this. Sometimes the best decisions are the ones that feel right in your gut, not the ones that make sense on paper. As I made my way upstairs to my room, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing at a crossroads. The path back to my old life seemed increasingly unappealing. The cramped apartment, the hospital politics, the constant struggle to provide adequate care with inadequate resources. But the path forward, deeper into Oliver's world, felt equally dangerous for entirely different reasons. I checked on Owen before going to my own room, as had become my nightly routine. He was sleeping peacefully, his breathing deep and regular. A stuffed triceratops clutched to his chest. The improvement in his health was undeniable, and I felt a fierce pride in having been part of his recovery. Miss Olivia? His voice was sleepy but alert. Are you going away? What makes you ask that, sweetheart? Dad seems worried. He gets a face when he's worried about people leaving. Owen sat up in bed, his dark hair mussed from sleep. My mom left when I was little. Dad got that same face then. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. In all our conversations, Oliver had never mentioned Owen's mother, and I'd assumed she was either deceased or simply out of the picture for unspecified reasons. The idea that she had chosen to leave, abandoning a sick child, and the man who clearly loved her, added a new dimension to my understanding of this family. Oh, Owen, I said, sitting on the edge of his bed. I'm not going anywhere, okay? I'm here to take care of you. Promise? He asked, and the vulnerability in his voice made my heart ache. I promise, I said. And in that moment, I meant it completely. But later, lying in my luxurious guest bed and staring at the ceiling, I wondered what exactly I had promised. To stay forever? To become part of a family whose patriarch conducted mysterious business that required armed security? To abandon my independence for the seductive comfort of being taken care of? The questions followed me into an uneasy sleep, where I dreamed of golden cages and children who needed me more than I needed my freedom. The first sign of real danger came on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 6 weeks after I'd moved into the Blackwood mansion. Owen and I were in the library, working through his homeschool lessons. Oliver had hired private tutors, but I helped with science and health education, when Marcus appeared in the doorway with an expression I'd never seen before. Ma'am? he said quietly. Mr. Blackwood needs to see you in his office immediately. Something in his tone made my stomach drop. In the weeks I'd been living here, I'd learned to read the subtle signals of the household staff. Mrs. Henderson's pursed lips when she disapproved of something, the gardener's tense shoulders when unknown cars lingered too long near the gates, and now Marcus's carefully controlled urgency that suggested real trouble. "Owen, why don't you continue with your worksheet?" I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I'll be back in a few minutes," but Owen had inherited his father's ability to read people in situations. "Is something wrong?" he asked, his eyes wide with the quick fear of a child who'd learned too young that the adults in his life could disappear without warning. "Nothing's wrong, sweetheart. Your dad probably just wants to discuss your medication schedule." I kissed the top of his head, breathing in the scent of his shampoo, and trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. Oliver's office was on the ground floor, behind heavy oak doors that I'd never seen open during my time in the house. Marcus knocked once, then escorted me inside before closing the doors behind me with a soft but definitive click. The room was exactly what I would have expected from Oliver Blackwood. Elegant, expensive, and designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined 2 walls, filled with leather-bound volumes that looked both valuable and well-read. A massive desk dominated the center of the space, its surface clear except for a single file folder and a crystal tumbler containing amber liquid. Oliver stood with his back to me, looking out through bulletproof glass windows at the grounds beyond. He was dressed in a charcoal suit that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders, but something about his posture suggested tension, possibly even anger. "Sit down, Olivia," he said, without turning around. I took one of the leather chairs facing his desk, my hands folded in my lap to hide their slight trembling. The silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken implications. "How long have you been reporting on our household to Dr. Martinez?" he asked finally, turning to face me. The question hit me like a physical blow. "What?" It's a simple question. His voice was calm, conversational, but his eyes held a coldness I'd never seen before. "How long have you been providing information about Owen's treatment, our security arrangements, our daily routines to your former colleague at Children's Hospital?" "I haven't," I started, then stopped as understanding dawned. "You mean my follow-up reports?" "Oliver, those are standard medical protocols. When a patient receives experimental treatment, the attending physician requires regular updates on their progress. Show me where in Owen's discharge paperwork it specifies that requirement." I opened my mouth to respond, then closed it again. He was right. There was no such requirement in Owen's official discharge papers. I'd been providing updates to Dr. Martinez because it felt like the right thing to do. A professional courtesy and a way to contribute to the medical literature on experimental treatments. I was documenting Owen's progress for research purposes, I said carefully. The treatment protocol we used was experimental. Those kinds of case studies could be very valuable to certain people, Oliver interrupted. People who might want to know about the health status of my son, the security measures protecting him, the layout of my home. The implication hit me like ice water. "You think I'm some kind of spy?" "I think you're a woman who's been living in my house, caring for my child, and sharing detailed information about our private life with outside parties." He moved around the desk to stand directly in front of me, close enough that I had to tilt my head back to maintain eye contact. "What I don't know is whether you're doing it intentionally, or if you're simply naive about how that information might be used." My hands clenched into fists in my lap. Those reports contain nothing but medical information. Owen's vital signs, his medication dosages, his response to treatment. Nothing about security, nothing about your business, nothing that could put him in danger. You mentioned the private tutors, the fact that he doesn't attend regular school, his schedule, his daily routines, the fact that he spends most afternoons in the library or the pool area. Oliver's voice remained calm. but there was an underlying current of menace that made my skin crawl. You described the layout of his room, the medical equipment available in the house, the staffing levels during different shifts. Each point he made was accurate, and I felt sick as I realized how comprehensive my reports had been. What had seemed like thorough medical documentation now sounded like surveillance intelligence. I never meant... I began. Intent is irrelevant, he said sharply. Results are what matter, and the result is that information about my son's vulnerabilities is now in the hands of people outside my control. Dr. Martinez would never... Dr. Martinez has a research assistant who's been asking very specific questions about Owen's case. Questions that go well beyond medical curiosity. Oliver leaned against the edge of his desk, his gaze never leaving my face. That research assistant is dating a man with connections to the Volkov organization, a Russian crime family that has very good reasons to want leverage against me. The room seemed to spin around me. I didn't know. I swear to you, Oliver, I had no idea. Of course you didn't. His tone softened slightly, but the coldness in his eyes remained. You're a nurse, not a criminal. You think in terms of patient care and medical ethics, not security protocols and information warfare, which is exactly why you should have trusted me to handle Owen's case documentation instead of maintaining outside contacts. The full scope of my mistake was becoming clear, and with it came a crushing sense of guilt. Is Owen in danger because of what I did? Owen is always in danger because of who I am, Oliver said bluntly. But yes, your reports have made him more vulnerable than he should be. The Volkovs now know his medical history, his daily schedule, his physical limitations. They know which rooms he frequents, when he's likely to be alone, how quickly he could be moved if evacuation became necessary. I felt sick. The child I'd been trying to protect, the little boy who'd promised never to leave, was now at greater risk because of my professional protocols and naive assumptions about medical confidentiality. What can I do? I asked quietly. How do I fix this? Oliver studied me for a long moment, and I could see him weighing my words, evaluating my sincerity. First, you're going to call Dr. Martinez and inform him that you're no longer able to provide updates on Owen's case due to patient confidentiality concerns. You'll explain that the family has requested complete privacy moving forward. Okay, yes, of course. Second, you're going to give me a complete account of every person you've spoken to about Owen, every detail you've shared, every question that was asked that seemed unusual or overly specific. I nodded, my mind already racing through months of conversations, trying to identify anything that might have seemed suspicious if I'd been looking for warning signs. And third, Oliver continued, moving closer until he was standing directly in front of my chair, you're going to understand that your position in this household has fundamentally changed. You're no longer just Owen's nurse. You're now a liability that needs to be managed. The words sent a chill down my spine. What does that mean? It means that leaving is no longer an option, he said simply. You know too much about our security, our routines, our vulnerabilities. You've been inside my home, observed my business practices, met my associates. You're either completely with us, or you're a threat that needs to be eliminated. The casual way he mentioned elimination made my blood run cold. You're talking about killing me. I'm talking about protecting my son, Oliver corrected. By any means necessary, but I'd prefer not to take that route, for obvious reasons. Because you care about me? The question slipped out before I could stop it. Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition of a truth he hadn't intended to reveal. Because Owen cares about you, he said finally. And because despite your spectacular failure in operational security, you've proven your loyalty to him beyond question. It wasn't exactly a declaration of affection, but it wasn't dismissal either. So what happens now? Now you become family, officially and permanently. No more trial periods, No more temporary arrangements. You belong to this household, to Owen, to me. In exchange, you receive protection, security, and everything you need to continue providing excellent care for my son. The word belong hung in the air between us, loaded with implications that went far beyond employment. And if I refuse? Oliver's smile was cold and sharp as a blade. Then we have a very different conversation about how to handle security risks. I looked into his eyes and saw no bluff, no negotiation, no room for compromise. He meant every word, and the civilized veneer that I'd grown accustomed to over the past weeks was just that, a veneer covering something much more dangerous. I choose Owen, I said quietly. I choose to stay. I thought you might. Oliver moved back around his desk, opening the file folder that had been sitting there throughout our conversation. These are the new arrangements. Your salary is being tripled, with the understanding that it's now hazard pay. A trust fund has been established in your name, accessible only if you remain in this position for a minimum of 5 years. Your apartment lease has been terminated, and your belongings will be moved here permanently. He slid a set of papers across the desk to me. There's also this. I looked down at what appeared to be adoption papers. Oliver, Owen needs a mother, he said matter-of-factly. And you need legal standing in this family that can't be easily challenged or dissolved. This ensures that your position here is permanent and protected. You want me to adopt Owen? I want you to become his legal guardian in the event that something happens to me. I want you to have parental rights that supersede any claims from his biological mother or her family. I want you bound to this household in a way that makes betrayal impossible and abandonment unthinkable. The papers were detailed, complex, and clearly prepared by expensive lawyers. Everything had been planned, anticipated, arranged before our conversation had even begun. How long have you been planning this? Since the day you agreed to the temporary arrangement, Oliver admitted. I don't leave important things to chance, Olivia. Owen needs you. And I've learned that what Owen needs, I acquire and protect. I stared at the papers, understanding that I was looking at the formalization of my golden cage. Beautiful, comfortable, but locked, nonetheless. And what do you need, Oliver? The question seemed to catch him off guard. For a moment, the controlled businessman facade slipped, revealing something more vulnerable beneath. I need to know that the most important people in my world are safe, he said quietly. I need to know that Owen will be cared for if something happens to me, and I need to know that I can trust you completely. Even after I've proven you can't? Especially after that, he said. Trust isn't about never making mistakes, Olivia. It's about how you handle the consequences of those mistakes. You could have lied to me, tried to cover up your communications with Dr. Martinez. Instead, you've accepted responsibility and agreed to make it right. I signed the papers because I had no real choice, but also because somewhere along the way, this had stopped being just about Owen's medical care. I'd fallen in love with the little boy who called me his guardian angel, who showed me his drawings and shared his dreams of becoming a paleontologist. I'd grown attached to the rhythms of this household, the sense of purpose and belonging that came with being truly needed. And if I was being completely honest, I'd also fallen under the spell of Oliver Blackwood himself. Not the dangerous criminal, but the devoted father who read bedtime stories in different voices and who'd learned to braid hair so Owen wouldn't feel different from children with mothers. Welcome to the family, Oliver said as I set down the pen, officially this time. As if summoned by some invisible signal, the office doors opened, and Owen bounded in, his face bright with excitement. Dad, Miss Olivia, Mrs. Henderson says we're having a celebration dinner tonight. What are we celebrating? Oliver scooped his son into his arms, and I watched as Owen wrapped his small arms around his father's neck with complete trust and love. We're celebrating that Miss Olivia is staying with us forever, Oliver said. She's going to be your new mom, legally and officially. Owen's eyes went wide, and then he launched himself from his father's arms into mine. Really? Really, truly, forever? Really, truly, forever, I confirmed, hugging him close and breathing in his familiar scent of apple shampoo and childhood innocence. Over Owen's head, I met Oliver's gaze and saw satisfaction there, but also something deeper. Possession, certainly, but also protectiveness and maybe even affection. I belong to this family now, completely and irrevocably. Whether that was a blessing or a curse remained to be seen. The attack came on a Thursday afternoon in November, during Owen's swimming lesson. We'd been living under heightened security for 3 weeks since my revelation about the leaked information, but life had settled into a new routine. Owen had adapted to the increased restrictions with the resilience of childhood, accepting that his swimming instructor now came to our pool instead of him going to classes, that his playdates happened exclusively at our house, that Marcus or another guard always accompanied us on any outings. I'd grown accustomed to the weight of eyes watching our every move, the subtle tension that permeated the household staff, the way Oliver's business calls were now conducted in languages I didn't recognize, and behind doors that locked with electronic keypads. The golden cage had acquired additional bars, but Owen was healthy and happy, and I'd convinced myself that the increased precautions were temporary. That illusion shattered when the pool house windows exploded inward. Owen was practicing his backstroke, his technique improving under the patient guidance of his instructor, when the first shots rang out. The instructor reacted with military precision, immediately diving to cover Owen and drag him toward the pool's edge closest to the house. I was sitting in a lounge chair, reviewing Owen's medication schedule, when glass began raining down around us. "Get down!" Marcus's voice cut through the chaos as he burst through the pool house doors, weapon drawn. "Move toward the house, now!" Training I didn't know I possessed took over. I grabbed Owen from his instructor's arms, wrapping him in a pool towel and shielding his body with mine as we ran toward the main house. His wet skin was slippery and cold, and I could feel his heart hammering against his ribs as he pressed his face into my shoulder. "What's happening?" he whispered, his voice small and terrified. "Miss Olivia, what's happening?" "It's okay, baby," I lied, stumbling slightly as another round of gunfire erupted behind us. "We're just playing a game. We need to get inside quickly." Mrs. Henderson was waiting at the service entrance, her face pale but determined. She grabbed Owen from my arms and immediately headed toward what I now realized was a safe room, hidden behind a false wall in the pantry. The efficiency with which she moved suggested this wasn't her first experience with emergency protocols. "Where's Oliver?" I gasped, water and glass still dripping from my hair. "He's coming," Mrs. Henderson said tersely, ushering us into a room that looked like a smaller version of a nuclear bunker. Thick walls, independent air supply, communication equipment, and enough supplies to last several days. "He was in the city when the breach occurred. Marcus is coordinating security until he arrives." Owen was shivering, whether from cold or fear, I couldn't tell. I wrapped him in emergency blankets and held him close, my own hands shaking as adrenaline coursed through my system. Through the communication system, I could hear Marcus coordinating with other security personnel, his voice calm and professional as he reported positions and damage assessments. "6 hostiles neutralized," came a voice I didn't recognize. "2 escaped over the north wall. Property secure, but we recommend maintaining lockdown until primary arrives." "Understood," Marcus replied. "ETA on primary?" 15 minutes. 15 minutes that felt like hours. Owen had stopped shivering and fallen into the exhausted sleep that sometimes follows intense fear. I held him carefully, studying his peaceful face and trying not to think about how close we'd come to losing him. When Oliver finally arrived, his entrance into the safe room was like a force of nature. Even in the confined space, he dominated everything around him, his presence both reassuring and terrifying. He was still wearing his business suit, but it was rumpled, and there was a hardness in his expression that I'd never seen before. "Report," he said to Marcus, his voice clipped and controlled. 6-man team, professional-grade equipment. They knew the property layout, including pool schedule and guard rotations. This was planned, not opportunistic. Oliver's jaw tightened. "Casualties?" Thompson took a round in the shoulder, but he'll recover. "The swimming instructor is shaken but unharmed. No civilian casualties." "The escaped hostiles?" "Being tracked. We'll have them within the hour." Throughout this exchange, Oliver's eyes kept moving to Owen and me, checking that we were unharmed while simultaneously processing the security information. When Marcus finished his report, Oliver knelt beside us, his hands gentle as he checked Owen for injuries. "He's okay," I whispered. "Scared, but physically fine." "And you?" "I'm okay too." Oliver nodded, but something in his expression suggested he was making calculations, weighing options, preparing for decisions that would have far-reaching consequences. "This changes everything," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" "I mean that someone just tried to kidnap my son. Not for ransom, not as a warning, but as a direct attack on my family." His voice was deadly calm, but I could see the fury burning beneath the surface. "That requires a response." Over the next several hours, as Owen slept and the house was secured and cleared, I learned more about Oliver's world than I'd ever wanted to know. The attack had been orchestrated by Viktor Volkov, the Russian crime boss who'd been gathering intelligence about our household. The escaped attackers had been captured and were being questioned about their organization's plans and resources. "How long will this go on?" I asked as Oliver and I sat in his office, the bulletproof windows now reinforced with additional steel panels. "Until it's finished," he said simply. "Until Viktor Volkov understands that attacking my family was the last mistake he'll ever make." There was something in his tone that made me afraid to ask for clarification. "Oliver, what are you planning?" "I'm planning to eliminate a threat to my son's safety," he said, pouring himself a drink from the crystal decanter on his desk. "And to send a message to anyone else who might consider Owen a target." "You're talking about war." "I'm talking about protection." He turned to face me, his expression serious. "This is who I am, Olivia. This is what I do when someone threatens what's mine. I destroy them completely, so thoroughly that their associates and rivals learn not to make the same mistake." The casual way he discussed violence and destruction should have horrified me. Instead, I found myself oddly comforted by his absolute certainty, his unwavering commitment to protecting Owen by any means necessary. "What about us?" I asked. "Owen and me? What happens to us while you're fighting this war?" "You stay safe. You stay here, where I can protect you, until this is resolved." He moved closer, his hand reaching out to cup my face with surprising tenderness. "I won't let anyone hurt you, Olivia. Either of you. That's a promise." The next few days passed in a blur of heightened security and controlled chaos. Owen, resilient as always, adapted to the new restrictions with the help of additional activities and distractions. Oliver had arranged for a full arcade to be installed in the basement, complete with every game a 7-year-old could want. There were new books, new toys, and a virtual reality system that let Owen explore dinosaur exhibits from museums around the world. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, the household was preparing for war. I saw the signs in the increased number of security personnel, the careful coordination of schedules and movements, the way Oliver's business meetings now happened exclusively in his office with men who carried themselves like soldiers. "Miss Olivia," Owen said one evening as I tucked him into bed, "is Dad going to fight the bad men who tried to hurt us?" The directness of his question caught me off guard. "Your dad is going to make sure we're safe," I said carefully. "That's his job, protecting his family. But he might get hurt." It wasn't a question, and the maturity in Owen's voice reminded me that this child had grown up in a world where violence was always a possibility. "Your dad is very good at staying safe," I said, "and he has lots of people helping him. But you're scared." Again, not a question. Owen had inherited his father's ability to read people and situations with unsettling accuracy. "A little," I admitted, "but mostly I'm focused on taking care of you." "Good," Owen said, settling back against his pillows. "Dad says you're the strongest person he knows. He says you're braver than most of his soldiers." "He said that?" "He says lots of things about you when he thinks I'm not listening," Owen said with the matter-of-fact honesty of childhood. "He says you make him feel like he can be a better person, and that he doesn't know what we did before you came to take care of us." The revelation sent warmth spreading through my chest, but also a sharp pang of fear. If Oliver cared for me the way Owen suggested, then my presence in his life wasn't just about medical care or convenience. It had become something deeper, more complicated, more dangerous. That night, as I made my final check on Owen before heading to my own room, I found Oliver standing in the hallway outside his son's door. He was still dressed in the tactical gear that had become his standard outfit, all black clothing and communication equipment that made him look more like a special forces operator than a businessman. "Is he okay?" he asked quietly. "He's worried about you," I said, "but he's handling all of this better than most adults would." "He's had practice," Oliver said grimly. "This isn't the first time our home has been attacked, though it's the first time since you've been here." The admission hit me like a physical blow. "Oliver, I can't. If my presence here is putting Owen in more danger, your presence here is the only thing keeping me sane," he interrupted, his voice rough with emotion. "The only thing giving me a reason to come home safely." Before I could respond, he stepped closer, close enough that I could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the weight of responsibility and fear that he carried for his son's safety. "When I heard about the attack, when I realized you and Owen were in danger while I was across the city in a meeting, I felt something I haven't felt since his mother left. Pure, paralyzing terror." "Oliver, I love you," he said simply, the words hitting me with the force of revelation. "I've been in love with you since the night you figured out what was wrong with Owen when a dozen specialists couldn't. I'm in love with your intelligence, your dedication, your fearlessness in protecting what matters." The confession hung between us in the dim hallway, weighted with all the complications of our situation. "This isn't the time," I whispered. "This is exactly the time," he countered, "because tomorrow I'm going to do things that might ensure you and Owen are safe forever, or might get me killed in the process. And I needed you to know that whatever happens, you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever." "What's that?" "Hope," he said. And then he kissed me. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, a question rather than a demand. But when I didn't pull away, when I found myself leaning into him instead, it deepened into something desperate and fierce. All the tension and fear and unspoken emotion of the past weeks poured into that moment, and I understood with crystal clarity that whatever happened next, there was no going back to the careful professional distance I'd been trying to maintain. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Oliver rested his forehead against mine. "Stay with him," he said quietly. "Whatever happens tomorrow, whatever you hear, just stay with Owen and keep him safe." "Where are you going?" "To end this," he said, "once and for all." Oliver left before dawn, and the house fell into an eerie silence that seemed to press against my chest like a physical weight. Owen woke early, immediately sensing the change in atmosphere, even though nothing visible had altered in his routine. "Dad's gone," he stated over breakfast. Not a question, but a simple acknowledgement of fact. "He'll be back," I said, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "Mrs. Henderson made your favorite pancakes." Owen picked at his food, his usual enthusiasm dampened by worry. The bad men are going to try to hurt him, aren't they? There was no point in lying to a child who'd lived his entire life surrounded by the realities of his father's world. Your dad is very careful, I said instead, and he has good people helping him. What I didn't say was that Oliver had left with a team of 12 men, all armed with military-grade weapons and communication equipment. I'd watched from my bedroom window as they loaded into unmarked vehicles, their movements precise and coordinated like a special forces unit preparing for deployment. Marcus had remained behind with a skeleton crew to protect the house, but even he seemed tense as the day wore on without word from Oliver's team. By mid-afternoon, Owen had abandoned any pretense of normal activities and was sitting in the library, staring out the window toward the gates as if he could will his father to return safely. "Miss Olivia," he said suddenly, "what happens to us if Dad doesn't come back?" The question I'd been dreading hung in the air between us. "Owen, your dad is going to come back. He's strong and smart, and he loves you more than anything in the world." "But what if he doesn't?" Owen's dark eyes, so like his father's, held a maturity that broke my heart. What if the bad men hurt him like they hurt my mom? I froze. "Owen, what do you mean about your mom?" "She didn't just leave," he said quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "Dad thinks I don't remember, but I do. The men came to our old house when I was little. There was lots of yelling and scary noises. Then Mom was gone and there was blood on the floor." The revelation hit me like ice water. Oliver's ex-wife hadn't abandoned them. She'd been killed, murdered by his enemies, while Owen watched from wherever his father had hidden him. The weight of that trauma, carried by a child who'd been protecting his father's feelings by pretending to believe the more palatable fiction, was staggering. "Oh, sweetheart," I breathed, pulling him into my arms. "I'm so sorry." "That's why Dad has so many guards now," Owen continued, his small body trembling against mine. "That's why we can't go places like other kids. That's why he gets scared when people try to hurt our family." I held him tighter, understanding now why Oliver's reaction to the attack had been so swift and absolute. He'd lived through losing the mother of his child to violence. He wouldn't survive losing Owen, and he clearly wasn't willing to risk losing me either. "Your dad is going to come home," I said with fierce conviction, "and we're going to be here waiting for him." The call came at 6:37 p.m. Marcus answered his secure phone on the second ring, his face grim as he listened to the voice on the other end. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I watched his expression change from tension to relief, to something that might have been satisfaction. "Understood," he said finally. "ETA?" After he hung up, Marcus turned to me with the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in days. "They're coming home, all of them." Owen launched himself at Marcus with uncharacteristic exuberance, wrapping his arms around the big man's waist. "Dad's okay? Really okay?" "Really okay," Marcus confirmed, ruffling Owen's hair with surprising gentleness. "He'll be here within the hour." The next 53 minutes felt like the longest of my life. Owen bounced between excited chatter and nervous energy, while I tried to process what Oliver's return would mean. Had he succeeded in eliminating the threat from Viktor Volkov? What exactly had happened during the hours he'd been gone, and what did this mean for our future, for the confession he'd made the night before? When the convoy finally pulled through the gates, Owen and I were waiting in the front hallway. The sound of car doors slamming and quiet voices carried through the evening air, followed by footsteps on the front stairs. Oliver walked through the front door looking like a man returning from war. His clothes were different from what he'd worn that morning. Clean, but clearly not the same tactical gear. His face was harder, marked by exhaustion, and something that might have been relief or satisfaction. But when he saw Owen running toward him, all of that fell away, replaced by pure paternal love. "Dad!" Owen launched himself into his father's arms with complete trust and abandonment. "You came back. You promised you'd come back and you did." Always, Oliver said, his voice rough with emotion as he lifted his son and held him close. I will always come back to you. Over Owen's head, his eyes found mine, and I saw in them a mixture of triumph and something darker, the knowledge of what he'd done to ensure our safety, what lines he'd crossed to protect his family. He looked like a man who'd won a victory at great personal cost. Is it over? I asked quietly. Oliver nodded once, still holding Owen, but speaking directly to me. It's over. Viktor Volkov is dead. His organization has been scattered. The threat to this family has been eliminated. The casual way he announced murder should have horrified me. Instead, I felt a profound sense of relief wash over me. Owen was safe. We were all safe. Whatever Oliver had done, whatever methods he'd employed, the result was that the shadow hanging over our family had been lifted. Good, I said, and meant it completely. Later, after Owen had been fed, bathed, and tucked into bed with extra stories and reassurances, Oliver and I finally had a chance to talk privately. We sat in his office, the scene of so many difficult conversations, but tonight the atmosphere felt different. Settled. Final. Tell me, I said simply. Oliver poured himself a drink, his movements careful and controlled. Viktor had to be stopped permanently. His organization was built around the idea that attacking families was an acceptable form of leverage. As long as he lived, as long as his people believed that strategy could succeed, Owen would never be truly safe. So you killed him. I executed him, Oliver corrected. After he confessed to ordering the attack on this house, after he admitted to having plans to kidnap Owen and use him to force my cooperation in his expansion into Chicago. There was a difference in his mind between murder and execution, between crime and justice. In Oliver's world, threatening his child was a capital offense that carried only one possible sentence. What about his organization? Neutralized. His lieutenants are dead. His operations have been absorbed or destroyed. His remaining soldiers have been given the choice to leave Chicago permanently or join their boss. Oliver's expression was cold, businesslike. It was thorough. And now? Now we rebuild, he said, moving closer to where I sat. Now we create something better, something safer. Viktor's territory becomes mine, along with his resources and connections. The power vacuum gets filled by someone who understands the value of protecting families rather than threatening them. It was empire building, plain and simple. Oliver had used the attack on our home as justification for a hostile takeover that would significantly expand his influence and power. But he'd also ensured that no one would ever again see Owen as a viable target. I need to know, he said, sitting across from me, if you can live with what I've done. If you can be part of a family where violence is sometimes necessary to protect what we love. The question hung between us, heavy with implication. This was my chance to leave, to take some kind of moral high ground and walk away from a man who just confessed to multiple murders. But when I looked at Oliver, all I could see was a father who'd risked everything to keep his child safe, a man who'd eliminated a threat that could have destroyed our family. I can live with it, I said quietly. I can live with anything that keeps Owen safe. Something shifted in Oliver's expression, relief and satisfaction, and something deeper. And us? Can you live with us? What exactly are you asking me, Oliver? He slid from his chair to kneel in front of mine, taking my hands in his. I'm asking you to marry me. Not for convenience, not for security, but because I love you and I want you to be my wife in every way that matters. The proposal was simple, direct, and completely sincere. No grand gestures or romantic speeches. Just a powerful man making himself vulnerable by asking for what he wanted most. What about Owen? I asked. Owen adores you. You're already more of a mother to him than his biological mother ever was. The adoption papers we signed make you his legal guardian, but I want you to be his mother in every sense. And your world, your business, the danger, will always exist to some degree, Oliver admitted. But it will never again touch this family the way it did this week. I've built something now that can protect what's mine without requiring constant vigilance. You and Owen will be safe. I looked into his eyes and saw absolute conviction, unwavering determination, and love so fierce it took my breath away. This man had restructured an entire criminal empire to ensure my safety and his son's future. He'd killed to protect us, and would kill again without hesitation if threatened. Yes, I said simply. Oliver's smile was radiant, transforming his face from cold businessman to the man I'd fallen in love with. He kissed me then, soft and sweet and full of promise, sealing a bargain that would bind us together forever. 6 months later, Owen stood beside us as Oliver and I exchanged vows in a private ceremony in the mansion's garden. He wore a miniature tuxedo and carried the rings with solemn importance, his face bright with joy at finally having the complete family he'd always wanted. As Oliver slipped the ring onto my finger, I thought about the strange path that had brought us together. A sick child, a desperate father, and a nurse willing to think outside conventional protocols. It had begun with medical crisis and evolved into something none of us could have predicted. I now pronounce you husband and wife, the minister said, and Oliver kissed me as Owen cheered and the household staff applauded. Later, as we danced to music played by a string quartet on the terrace, Owen tugged on my dress. Now we're really a family forever, right? No one can make you leave? No one can make me leave, I confirmed, lifting him up so he could dance with us. We're stuck with each other forever. Good, Owen said, wrapping his arms around both of us. That's exactly what I wanted. As the sun set over Lake Michigan, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, I realized that sometimes the most unexpected journeys lead to the most extraordinary destinations. I'd come into this house as a nurse trying to save a sick child. I was leaving as a wife and mother, part of a family that would protect each other with absolute devotion. Oliver's arms tightened around me as we swayed to the music, and I felt the solid weight of belonging, of being exactly where I was meant to be. Whatever challenges lay ahead, we would face them together. Whatever threats emerged, we would meet them as a united front. I was no longer just Olivia the nurse. I was Olivia Blackwood, wife to one of the most powerful men in Chicago, mother to a little boy who'd given me purpose beyond anything I'd ever imagined. And for the first time in my life, I was completely, utterly, irrevocably home.